All right, you ready to go? Good. I told you forward. I was going to write something nice to you, Dan. Hey, Hartman, can you hear us?
Hear you just fine, Mayor. Yes, sir. Can hear you just fine.
You had to blur out Vail so we're not jealous.
I had to blur it out.
All right, calling the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is discussion of utility billing disconnect update. Is this you all night, the whole thing?
The whole work session.
You got your drink?
I got my drink.
Okay,
I'm not gonna get thirsty.
it's all yours, sir.
All right.
Yeah, but somebody already almost tripped over. Somebody almost tripped over it already, so please be aware. There is a new cord in the room. Don't trip.
I'm not doing that.
Yeah, let's throw that on there. Make the room not go anymore. Go for it, Stephen.
All right. Kick off the work session. We'll talk about utility disconnection. So on June 7th of this year, Finance Administration Department brought forward some recommended disconnection policy changes to the board for some review, input, and feedback. This discussion served as a follow-up from some initial public comment that the board heard on February 15th, which was kicked off by some issues with checks coming to the city and a customer being disconnected. After that June 7th work session, staff followed up with some of the consensus and recommendations that the board provided on disconnection and has some information to share. Right now, as a quick review, the city performs disconnections for accounts that are greater than $75 in balance for trash, water, wastewater, the entire balance on the first business day following the 26th of the month. For utility customers, it means they have about 15 to 25 days from the first time they receive their bill. Of course, the speed of the post office plays a big role in that. When the board brought their initial recommendation on the June 7th meeting, we all talked about looking at doing the first business day after the 16th of the following cycle. There was some consensus on that. When we met with our finance and utility staff, we talked about that date as a date that could likely cause some confusion for utility customers, with that date being the due date for bills. And then the other factor, and this just happened a couple of days ago, today's the 16th. Yesterday, we had an incredible amount of activity come into in terms of checks getting mailed, calls coming in. Our staff was full bore working on payments. So we're really at full capacity around the 15th and the 16th and 17th of the month. That 3-day stretch is super busy. So with those two factors in mind, just having the board look at exploring an alternative disconnection date is our recommendation. And then talking with Cynthia and our staff, we came up with pushing that out just a little bit farther, looking to go the first business day after the 19th. So all in all, you're looking at giving people another maybe 22, 24 days past the current disconnection date with this new proposal to the first business day after the 19th. In addition to that, we also talked about the second shutoff process and what we would do with that process. Right now, if you call in prior to that first business day after the 26th, you can get a 7-day extension on your bill. But the staff got together, we discussed just abandoning that second shutoff since we're already going to allow an additional 24 days. The other piece that we investigated last time, the board had a lot of favor for having the tiered and scaled reconnection charges with the clean slate. We got with our software provider, Tyler Tech, and talked about if our software could do something like that for the city. And their answer really was no, that the software can't support that type of feature. So based upon that discussion, we're recommending not going with the tiered and scaled reconnection system, and just continuing to keep the disconnect charge at $50. Any comments before I move on and talk about the rest of the report?
I have a question, Stephen. If I remember, I thought last time we talked about moving it a month, right? So moving it a whole month instead. So you're saying that now you're talking about 24 days instead. I thought we talked about a month, like 30 days, right? And then if they don't pay it on time, the disconnect notice. Am I wrong on that? Maybe my notes are wrong.
We took a look at the minutes last time, and I think Alderman Chevalier, you had brought up a comment about putting it at the first business day after the 16th of the month. And I think we had some consensus on that in the minutes. And so what that would mean is with a bill going out, with a bill getting produced on the first of the month and hitting someone's mailbox shortly thereafter, or if you have email, it's immediately delivered to your inbox. Really, when that bill's available, if you take it on the email, that customer is getting more than a month to pay before they get disconnected. They get all that current billing cycle month, and then they get an additional 15, 16 days into the next month to pay. So for someone who would get their bill emailed and they would get that on the first, the second of the month, when they look in their inbox, they're going to get 45 days then to pay that bill until they're subject for disconnection.
Yeah, because the
Is that-
16th was the due date, and then this is basically another month after the due date. So they
Okay.
do have an
Mhm.
extra month. Yeah.
Right.
So, but
Okay.
now if they're,
Yeah.
now they're
Great
asked to just move to the 19th, which is probably fine.
Got it. I see. Thank you very much.
And just to make sure also, one of staff's concerns is going out any further than that, then it starts becoming confusing to the customer as to what month they're paying and where they are on the bill when the next billing cycle comes out.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board on that piece?
The only thing I'm still wondering is the reconnect fee still too low? I mean, $50. I mean, I kind of feel like, we're going to extend this out. We should make it more of a penalty for people that are not paying their bill on time.
That was my consensus the first time around too.
I don't know. I still say $50 is quite a bit.
The reason I think $50, we're going up from 25, right, to 50. Let's leave it at 50. Is because if someone had a problem paying it, right? I mean, I don't want to dig it into a hole so they can't get it at all, right? If they have a problem, hopefully they dug at it by now. We give them extra time.
It's
I want
like
to
a-
go
it's like
extra.
a Overdraft fee, you don't have any money and they charge you a $35 fee on top of that. And it compounds, you get another auto debit or whatever comes through your account. Now you're another $35 down. So usually if somebody has a problem paying a bill, charging them more to, once they caught up, to reconnect them is kind of harsh. So I would say stick with the 50. It covers the labor involved, especially with any, other than pushing the button to say, go out and do it. Somebody has to go out and do it.
Right. Yeah, we looked at the labor involved, and, for parts of Smithville that are kind of far away from City Hall, there's a lot of drive time involved in getting up there and making the switch and everything. So
Yeah.
50 was appropriate from the labor standpoint.
Yeah, the bill is more of a help to the hindrance of the lag time with UPS and not necessarily for penalties.
So just to follow up, consensus to leave it at 50? Okay. So other than that, good with what we've brought forward? And Stephen, sorry to step on your toes. What we'll
No.
do then is bring a new policy forward. As part, this will be implemented with the budget process then. This will be one more thing that we bring forward as part of that review, and then effective November 1st.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Stephen, for all of your and your staff's work on this.
Ready for part two? Got money, right? That's all you need to, it's all you're here to report on. There's money in the bank.
No, do we have it?
Check out this minutes, we still got it, right?
You're asking the wrong person.
I know. I was wanting you to say your dollar.
$2. $2 in 2 weeks. Everything takes 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. We're ready in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Can we get a wired clicker also?
Just asking for a friend.
Just asking for a friend.
All right, tonight we'll look at our fiscal year 2022 9-month budget update. Through 9 months of fiscal activity, the board has approved a number of budget amendments, includes project costs increasing, our classification and compensation study, and then bringing in some revenues for project out on Highway 169, businesses get developed. They also approved the establishment of the CID fund a couple budget amendments ago. Right now, at this point, in 9 months, we've gone through 19 of our 26 fiscal year payrolls. It's about 73% of the payrolls have been paid. On the general fund side, we're continuing to see some excellent revenue performance through 9 months. We budgeted 4.9 for this year, and we're looking to bring in about 5.2. So it's about $300,000 in addition. So that's really good to see. We're at about 4.2 through 9 months. At this point, bringing in sales tax, user fees really is going to be what we see in the last 3 months. On the expenditure side, we are continuing to see inflation affect our budget. You know, fuel costs have gone up, other commodity costs. We have had some vacancies this year in the police department. We have filled a lot of positions, but we've seen a little bit of vacancies that's helped us save some money. So on the projection side, we're about 100,000 below the budget. We spent about 4.3. On the project side, we've almost completed all the work, all the one-time projects that we were looking to get done this year, campground upgrade, transportation master plan, and finishing downtown streetscape. On the property tax side, I could say as of yesterday, we did reach the $1 million mark on revenue, which is great for property tax. We'll probably beat that projection there of 1,000 by a little bit. And typically at this point in the year, we have maybe another 5,000 to 10,000 that we'll bring in. In the last 4 years, calling out that third bullet point, we've seen an average annual increase in property tax of about 4.6%. So this has been a reliable source and a foundation for our revenues. You can see there the growth year over year on property tax. You can see at Q3, we're typically about $40,000 to $60,000 higher year over year. Similar story on the 1% city sales tax. We're projecting to beat our budget by $35,000 to $40,000. We've brought in $930 so far this year. And then our year over year performance, we're continuing to see some consistent growth. So that's great in an age where you're going to see where use tax is growing and online purchases are growing. We still are having good growth in sales tax. So that's great to see. In our use tax projections, this year we've budgeted 560. We're projecting to bring in 640. And depending on how these last 2 months go, we could really even beat that. It's just been very volatile, but for the last 4 to 6 months, we've seen use tax month over month over month beat the previous year. So that's been very good news for the city. The receipts have accelerated in this year as people get online and make purchases with convenience involved. You can see the use tax growth over time by Q3 is pretty enormous. And you can see that there's a trend from 2020, 2021, and 2022. We're certainly going to surpass that. I think we've already beat last year's totals through 10 months of activity. So it's doing very well. The bottom line for the general fund is that financially, the fund is in really good shape. We started this year better off than what we had budgeted. Our revenues are higher. Our expenses are just slightly lower. So in terms of how much money we're going to use in terms of fund balance, we thought we'd spend close to $1 million, but we'll probably be closer to 560. So the fund is in great shape. And it's going to set us up pretty well for next year and the next few years for our budget. Moving on to capital improvement sales tax. Again, the three special sales taxes you'll see are all going to beat their budgets on the projections. In terms of our projects, we're in progress on the streetscape phase 3 engineering, continuing to pay that contract. Completed streetscape phase 2, and then also completed our transfer to debt service. The trend on the capital improvement sales tax year over year has been positive, and we're going to continue to see that growth, I think, in this year and be close to the 660, 670 mark for this sales tax. The debt service fund, we've received those revenues, the transfer over from the capital improvement sales tax, and we've also made our geo debt payments. And just as a reminder, we issued debt so that we could fund projects here in the city, including streetscape and our Main Street Trail. So those have been great amenities that we've added to our community, just starting to service the debt as time goes on for those projects. Transportation sales tax. We got our mill and overlay program completed this year with Hospital Drive and Tillman on the left. Again, the revenues look good in the fund. And really at this point, we just have some of the street operational expenditures in this fund, but we've got all our projects completed for this year. I think we have another 50 maybe to spend on some intersection work, but the majority of the program has been completed. You can see there consistent growth in the revenue year over year for that sales tax. Switching gears in our water and wastewater fund, on the left, we had our crew get out there a couple of weeks ago and make some repairs, get a water leak fixed at Meadow Street and Commercial, keeping our system going and keeping it running. They did a good job that day getting that leak done. In terms of revenues for our fund, we budgeted 5.9, and we're looking to bring in about a couple $100,000 higher. We'll see that that's in our water and wastewater sales, doing a little bit better than budget. We've received our entire amount of revenue from Clay County, which is awesome for the ARPA funding, the 805 that their commission passed. We've received all those funds. In terms of the projects, we do have some projects that are in progress. We do have some delays that are affecting our digester project with supply chain issues. So I don't know, Cynthia, if you want to touch upon that with a little more information or not, but our aerobic digester.
I may defer to Chuck on this, but we received word today, I believe it was, that the main part, the digester, the actual equipment, is not anticipated for shipment until next summer. So that affects timing of the project. We had anticipated completion of the project in November of this year without the major piece. That delays that project. So with that news just today, that is one of the things we'll take a look at the utility fund, see projects that if we need to move things around, that's a significant chunk of change that won't be expended this year, because with completion in November, we had planned to finish that this year. So we'll have significantly more cash on hand, see if there are things we can move up, but we know that we'll still have to complete that project and pay for those funds once. And we actually will also need to make sure and working, I'm not sure if there's any payments we have to make in order to be able to get that shipped. And so all those things that we'll need to look at, but you might see minor changes in the utility CIP based on that project. And I see at least one alderman going, okay, that's a long time. Our engineers have already also checked to see if there would be other equipment, different brand, things like that. They have also similar timelines they're hearing basically of all brands of the equipment and the likes. I think it's something that we're all kind of accustomed to at this point in time, although it's frustrating.
How does, excuse me, how does that impact on the operation, planned operation?
So we still have our
Current system.
The rake that you used to break it all out.
It still
Guy blows
blows
in
the
a
bubbles
hose.
up. We still have our aerator.
Yeah.
It's just the aerator is one that it's at the bottom of the basin and it blows the bubbles up. And to maintain it, and it's very old and brittle and it breaks, and then you just have the air just blowing through, and that's not good. So this new system is an aerobic
Floating.
floating. I don't know why I'm lost my. Anyway, it floats on the surface, so we can pull it in and we can maintain it, and it blows the air down. So we still have a system that's working. So
In case of
that's not a
emergency,
problem.
Chuck just blows in a hose and makes bubbles. Just
I
don't
was
suck in.
really, excited about this budget.
We lost on that one.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Chuck. You blow bubbles in sewer. We love it. We're late on our new bubble blower.
On the revenue side of our utility fund, the water and wastewater sales makes up 90% of the revenue in the fund. So majority of it comes from here. Both water and wastewater are performing well at this time. The water sales this month in particular will really determine how well we're going to do just with all the hot weather and all the consumption of water. So I always pay attention to these last couple months of the year. But we're looking to achieve the budget on water sales, and then wastewater is really looking good at this point too, projecting to bring in about 1.9. You can see the trend has been to have revenue growth. It's very consistent at Q3 year over year. As we've said, the rate adjustments that we've made so that we can do upgrades and improvements to our system, they've brought in more revenue over time, along with account growth. The bottom line for the utility fund, we started this year off better than what we had budgeted. Our revenues were a little higher, and with some of the movement in projects and delays, expenses will be a little lower. So the overall ending fund balance will be better than what we budgeted. It continues to set us up well for the future. On the trash fund, the revenues are going to be a little slightly below budget. Really what we pay attention to here is just how we do in comparison to expenditures and make sure we're pretty close to being even on these. And through 9 months, we're looking pretty good at about a $4,000 difference. What that looks like, typically at this point in the year, revenues tend to be a little higher than expenditures, but not concerned about it at this point. Being a $4,000 difference is pretty negligible, but good to see it close. There's always consistency year over year in how close revenues and expenses are since it's passed through. This year for the park and stormwater sales tax, we completed the Diamond Crest Neighborhood Park. And the second bullet point I'll make there, the stormwater master plan, that'll be a project you'll see in the upcoming proposed budget. It'll be in 2023 that we pursue that project. In the vehicle fund, in terms of revenues, just as an update, as of July, our city has sold 14 vehicles to Enterprise. We've sold 13 in-house, and we've done 1 flip. And we have 4 vehicles that we've just sold with Enterprise, and we're waiting to collect funds on those, and those will total about $90,000. So in these last 3 months, we have a lot of revenue that we're still going to bring in for the city in terms of vehicles that just got sold. On the expense side, our lease cost is going up as we get more vehicles leased from Enterprise, and we have that set up as a budget amendment so that we can pay for that and with increased costs in vehicles. But we're going to see a lot of revenue in these final 3 months as we get those vehicles sold. Last but not least, the ARPA fund. I think the mayor, myself, Cynthia, just got some notification this week or next. We'll get our final tranche payment, about $1.1 million. So we'll have that fund, all the revenue collected so we can pay for the raw water pump station. We have good progress out there. And we're at the point now where we've expended all the Clay County ARPA money and we're using the direct treasury payments to pay for the project. So
Were we waiting on parts for that, raw water? Yeah. How long is that one out?
And a reducer too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
the big picture through 9 months for the city. Property tax revenues, they have exceeded $1 million. So overall, the general fund revenues are doing really well. Both sales tax and use tax, especially use tax, performing exceptionally well through these first 9 months. And then really the last point on the revenue is the ARPA funding that we got both from Clay County and from Treasury has really reduced the financial burden of our capital projects that we pay for in the water and sewer fund. So we were talking today, with our financial advisor, because of those grants, we didn't have to go out and get a COP issued for that project. So it's really brought back some capacity to do other projects. On the expenditure side, through these last 4 months, operational expenditures have increased with inflation, but we're still tracking on budget. And then we're watching the vehicle lease expense. We have a budget amendment lined up for that, but I was talking with Cynthia, really seeing how this fund performs in these final 3 months and at the end of the year is going to be crucial to understanding how that program works for us. So when we get through this fiscal year, I'm going to probably take a deep dive on that and look and see how that performance is done and talk to our directors about our vehicles and that sort of thing. So any questions on the 9 month?
On here.
I got a question, but it's not necessarily about the budget. How are we doing our restocking our water supply parts? I knew earlier we were really behind.
Well, the meters,
Right,
that's good.
okay.
At least we've been able to spend the Clay County funds down for the parts we do have. So the $1 million we're getting plus the $1 million we had, we're still good with our money. So yeah, we spend their money first.
To piggyback off of Marv's question, are we able to get more for forecasted home building?
We've already ordered more, a second 100 setups. And don't quote me on this, like 68, sitting down the stuff. So we should be good.
So more meters than buildable lots right now.
Yes.
Good place to be.
Because Greyhawk was at 68 new lots, I think, on their sign, and Eric had a couple of dozen. So yeah. Cool. No new subdivisions that came in. So yours is full. Awesome. Anything else before we move on to the fun new budget?
Hey, Mayor, I wanted to bring some up to the board. I think it's pretty exciting that we've reached $1 million because most people don't understand that that's only about 5% of the total property tax revenue, both on the residential and commercial side, where our school district gets over 70% or nearly 70%. So that's a big win for our city. And I'm glad to see that continuing upward.
Yep. Stoked. Thanks, Dan.
Mayor, if I might, real quick, as we go into the 2023 budget, I want to quickly thank Stephen and his staff. Included in your packet for tonight is the draft recommended budget. This is the first time when we have reviewed the budget for the first time, we've had the guts of the budget document. Stephen, Myra, and staff throughout the organization, and particularly Gina, have helped put that document together. And as I said, this is the first time we've been able to provide that amount of information to the governing body this early in the budget season. So I'm grateful and I'm pleased to be able to present that. This is the first organization that I've worked in that we have not done that at the time we've presented the budget. So 4 years we got there. Stephen, also, I want to just acknowledge the 9 month update. He's really distilled that information very well in a clear manner and appreciate that. So I also think the presentation you're about to receive has a number of slides, but it's good information. And Stephen is, it continues to improve the information we're presenting.
And if we need a break for lemon cupcakes, it's okay.
So, hey Chuck, since Matt is not here, if you find us a better picture for the slide on the front page, you could take that spot since he's not here to fight for it, but not the money.
I'm still here.
Oh, see, you missed it, Matt. Chuck was trying to get your money earlier. All right, moving on.
Yeah, thank you to Gina and Myra, 'cause that's why we can bring you a 70-page CIP by August 16th because of them and the directors doing that work. So
And I'd like to thank the 1985 Economic Development Committee for not developing a 70-page CIP because this would have already been done by now.
there you go.
Because they're talking about fixing sewers and streets and sidewalks in here. So, Never ending problem. And downtown. Downtown renovation was the number one thing. Awesome. Moving forward.
All right, well, it's a pleasure to bring you the proposed fiscal year 2023 operating budget and our 5-year capital improvement plan tonight. So I'll take you through the budget here and looking forward to having your feedback, your input, questions you may have. Just stop me at any time and we can talk about it. So we'll start tonight's presentation with an overview of the general fund, and we'll look at the general fund revenues first here. So set up in the table here is our actual 21 revenues on the left, our budget and where we're looking at for 22 and our budget for next year. As you work left to right, call out in 2021, we had pretty high revenues when you look at that compared to the other years. And the main reason for that was transferring CARES revenues that we received that year into the general fund to offset CARES eligible expenses. If it wasn't for that transfer, which is about 239,000, that revenue total would be lower or about on track with fiscal year 22. As you look at the big categories, property and sales tax, you're going to see growth in those categories from 22 to 23. There's a little bit of a decline in franchise taxes. Most of those are pretty stable. We're just seeing the cable franchise fees continue to decrease year over year. So that decrease gives us an overall category decrease. You'll see a growth in intergovernmental revenues. One of the growth areas is the gas tax that we talked about at the board retreat, and we've seen that tax go up 2.5 cents per gallon. So we're expecting to see more revenues there. Also in our charges for services, that's where our Smiths Fork campground revenues are. And so we're expecting that to be open for an entire year next year, as opposed to this year, we had it closed for a little bit of time. So we'll see some revenue growth there. Interest earnings, that's starting to really bounce back as recently as a week ago, as those rates have gone up. So I'm going to track that next year and see if that number even potentially doubles up to 100,000 where it used to be. So overall, it's a 3.7% increase in total revenues from where we're projecting this year to next year. So it's good to see that. Real quick, sales tax and property tax, those two categories make up almost 60% of the general fund. And then past there, our smaller categories make up the rest. When you look at these major categories, we talked about these at the board retreat. Property tax next year, we're going with a 3.5% growth assumption. So a little bit conservative, as we've seen 4 to 5% in previous years. But it'll put us about $1,036,000 for next year. On the 1% city sales tax, you can see over the last 4 to 5 years, we've seen growth on that category. For next year, we're going with a 2% growth assumption for city sales tax. And then on the city use tax, like I said, in the 9 months, that category is really accelerated. We've introduced new special sales taxes, which has increased the use tax rate, but we've also just seen online activity pick up. And so for next year, we're going with a 3% growth assumption. This category is really bolstering revenues, and I would point to it as being a big factor as to why we can afford some of the budget recommendations that we're going to discuss tonight. And we'll look at those in a few slides. before we get to those, these are some of the key operating assumptions. Really just the core expenditures and what we're seeing in terms of expense increase. One of those being health insurance, the employer portion, a 15% increase. A 5% increase in our electrical utilities, for example, our LED streetlights and the electricity that we would use out at the wastewater and water plants. Our fuel assumption, we've got that at $3.75 a gallon, which I thought 2 months ago wasn't going to be high enough, but fuel has been super volatile, as high as $4.45 a couple of months ago, and now we're seeing it down in the 330s. So we should be good with that assumption. Gains in propane, our custodial service, and our police dispatch. We all have increases built in for that. And then back on May 25th, we all got together and held the board retreat. And out of that retreat, the board had recommendations for this year's budget that they wanted to see as a consensus introduced in the budget. And so we feel that this table reflects some of those recommendations and some of those priority areas that you all brought forward. It starts with taking care of our personnel and our staff, $100,000 for a merit pool that would be implemented next year. $60,000 for a CPI adjustment to salaries, which would be implemented with the new fiscal year, and then a employer loggers contribution transition where we take the current 4% employee contribution and reduce that to 2% and move that over to the employer percentage burden. Also brought forward priorities to increase our overlay and our sidewalk programs. And so the general fund would contribute $200,000 for Quincy Boulevard sidewalk construction. Adding 2 positions in the general fund, it would be a street maintenance worker and a rec coordinator. So continuing to provide for our road repairs and improve our recreational amenities. On our technology side, making our ERP system more efficient, migrating to version 10 and Encode. On our equipment side, improving our equipment and selling old equipment, which is optimal for sale at this time, replacing mowers in the Parks Department. Adding $100,000 to our annual overlay program. Another recommendation that came out of the board retreat was to allocate more funding for the overlay program. And then the rest of the recommendations include the continuation of our neighborhood grant beautification at $25,000. Also doing wayfinding and signage work, with half of that covered through ARPA tourism match. Having a $20,000 payment back to our Main Street district, increasing that funding by $10,000. That recommendation came out of the last meeting. We discussed that. And then more technology replacements at City Hall, the police department, and then doing some interior work at the senior center. Any questions at this point on some of those recommendations?
Stephen, I have a question. The 2 vacancies that are budgeted, is that the max of the salary band range? Or is that median? What is that? Where
I
you got
believe
that
those are
number?
minimum.
When we incorporate
Minimums.
the expenditure estimates, it's the minimum salary. We also include our benefit expenditure estimates, and we estimate those at the highest cost. So somebody taking the highest level of health insurance, and so we estimate where we would potentially bring someone in on the pay scale, but then also high end of where we would be on benefits.
Oh, so you're bringing them low end of the pay scales where you put them in. Okay.
We begin at the minimum of the rank. We advertise at that minimum. We may sometimes negotiate upwards.
Okay. Thank you.
And then looking at everything in the general fund at a high level, expense wise, we're looking to increase our budget from our projected this year to next year, about a 5% expenditure increase. And so the bulk of that increase you can see comes in the personnel services, which is salaries, benefits, and really it's a result of adding those 2 positions, doing a CPI adjustment, doing merit, and doing the loggers transition. Those components play a big role in that gain in personnel services. And then by category, the city, primarily from expenditures, it's our salaries and our benefits for our staff that make up most of our budget. Followed by commodities, our fuel, our electricity, natural gas, capital improvement projects, or office furniture and equipment. And then contractual services includes dispatching, professional service agreements. So it's really our people that make up the biggest bulk of our budget, though, at 70%. The expenditures by department, if you look at police, parks and rec, and streets, those three departments compromise 72% of the budget. So most of our budget dedicated to fund services such as public safety, road maintenance, and recreational amenities. The rest of it, administration, finance, and development makes up the other quarter of the budget. The 5-year CIP for the general fund, we've made some revisions to this. When we came to the board in May and showed this CIP, we didn't have any funding for capital projects in the general fund. Really coming out of the retreat, the board conveyed that they wanted to see more investment in sidewalks, overlay. And so that's what this CIP tries to do. It invests more funds into those programs so that we can improve our sidewalks and make road improvements. These funds from the general fund help bulk up the mill and overlay program. We already have a few $100,000 in transportation sales tax, and so these will add to those programs and allow us to do more work. The proposed change in fund balance for next year, we're looking at starting at about 3.2 for next year, bringing in revenues of 5.4 and expending 6. We'd use about 650,000 in fund balance for next year. And then our cash flow summary, I just want to call out in the last meeting on August 2nd, the board approved that reduction in the general fund reserve. We went from 40% down to 25%. And so this graph in the green now represents our 25% reserve. And so now we've freed up a lot more reserve that we can utilize going forward. And you can see there's kind of a downward tilt to that. As we continue to move on and evaluate revenues, evaluate expenses, we can make adjustments to one times if we feel like we're approaching that reserve. Before we move on to water and sewer, anything else on general fund? Okay. All right. Look at the water and wastewater fund here.
Yummy.
Yeah. So as we talked about in May with this CIP, this 5-year CIP really puts an emphasis on replacing aging infrastructure in our city. And here we have a couple cross sections of pipe that I think Chuck took from Quincy and Fourth Terrace. Those projects are in the CIP. We're going to get those water lines replaced. We have problems with pressure. We have problems with water delivery through these pipes. So it's so critical that we get this work done so we can get this stuff replaced. The other really important piece to our CIP, hoping to get as much of this as we can, is the grant funding. And so I talked about in the 9-month how important the ARPA funding was to being able to pay for our projects without having to issue debt. Well, we've submitted projects and the board's approved some resolutions to get outside funding for projects. And you can see on the right, we have debris that ends up at the wastewater treatment plant, wipes, strings coming through there. We want to do a bar screen so that we can prevent that from happening. I know we're probably going to need to rely on receiving some grant money to do that project. So it's real important in the CIP. We'll call out the projects that we're looking to get grant funding on so we can make these improvements. Looking at fiscal year 2023 next year, it's going to be a $7 million CIP. Includes those water line replacements that we called out as being so critical. Water plant improvements that we've applied for, Missouri DNR ARPA funding for. And then we're looking to do some financing for the construction of the West Bypass and the lift station next year. When we look at the water and sewer CIP as a whole in the entire 5-year span, it's a $27.8 million CIP. So it's one of the most significant parts of the entire CIP is this portion. As we look to the out years, we have more projects called out in orange that we're looking to receive outside funding for. And then as we go further out 3 to 4 years, we start getting into the engineering for our expansion and capacity building projects. So there's a lot of work on the horizon in this fund. And there would be further financing to do as we move through it. We have our water impact and our wastewater impact projects. For our water impact fees, we would look to use some of those for the river crossing the 12-inch water line. And the board's also approved the resolution to submit for some grant funding for that project. On the wastewater impact projects, we would use those funds to do engineering for the wastewater plant and the Owens gravity line. For the pending projects in our CIP, we moved to the top of this list, the Northwest Subdivision Water Line Loop. And I think it would loop in a bunch of different neighborhoods that could allow us to take a section offline, but not shut the whole neighborhood down. So I think as we continue to move through next year in the budget, you can see if we can work that in, because I think that'd be a great improvement. I know that's been one of Chuck's recommendations. These pending projects total $25.3 million. So even in our 5-year span past that, we have a lot more work left in our system. The proposed budget recommendations in this fund, they continue to map on what we saw in the general fund. We have a merit pool, a CPI, and a loggers transition built into this fund. In this fund also, we have the addition of a water treatment plant shift supervisor for the evening. It would help with safety concerns and having another staff member out there. We've increased our slip line sewer program funding, pushing that up from $100,000. And we have funds in there for lagoon cleaning as well next year. In terms of the cash balance, we started this year with about 5.6 million in the fund. And a component of that is our water and our wastewater impact fees, which we can use for those projects. As we look to finish this year, we'll finish it with about the same amount in the non-impact cash balance, and we'll see a little bit of growth in the impact fees since we haven't done any projects this year with those fees. But we'll use those fees in the next couple of years to do the projects that we just saw. In terms of the cash balance, our goal is to stay above the blue line, just 20% of the operating budget, and we look to do that. You can see there's a big dip from this year to next year and the yellow going down. It just reflects that we're going to use a lot of fund balance to do a lot of projects next year. And of course, if you remember, we did a utility rate study that we completed this year. It prescribes annual rate increases so that we can pay for projects both with cash and finance. So those rate adjustments allow us to do all those projects that we just saw in that CIP. Before we move on, any questions on the water and sewer side? Okay. All right, we'll go through our special sales tax CIPs. Start with transportation sales tax. As you work from left to right, you have an old degraded road and you end up with a new one. So the 5-year transportation sales tax fund allocates $300,000, $200 next year, $300 in the out years, and it's supplemented by the general fund for our overlay program. So we're continuing to add to that program and bulk it up. Our sidewalk replacement program is also bulked up. It already has the $25,000 in it annually, and general fund will add another $50,000 in 24 and 25. We're doing a lot of overlay work next year, includes Quincy Boulevard and the commercial street sidewalks engineering and reconstruction on 4th Street. And then in 2024, one of the biggest projects in the 5-year is the commercial street sidewalks, which is supplemented by secured funding in green. On the pending side, I do want to call out a project at the top of the list, which is a raised pedestrian crosswalk and flashing beacon out by Maple Elementary School. We had some conversations about this being a priority to look at getting funding, possibly putting in the CIP. So up for discussion by the board, input by the board. We have a number of other pending overlay projects that are not funded at this time. Probably need to do further updates to the estimates as well.
Is there any other work that needs to be done on Second Street to where that's overlaid? Because we just did, you just did the water line, right? There's no sewer over there. It's a cemetery. I mean, sewer goes on the backside of the other stuff. Yeah. Not at Second, though. So, I mean, we're doing a lot of overlay work in that area next year. I think we could bump up the top two if we really wanted to look at how that looked. Because go back to the previous slide on the overlay. Because we have some overlay money out of the general fund too, right? So you got 200,000 TBD. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone object to working with the school district to try to get the Maple crosswalk funded? I know I get a lot of complaints, I'm sure you do too, about people speeding down Old F Highway. Putting in that speed bump type crosswalk like we did on Main at Maple and Old F Highway, I think would be beneficial. Okay, so is anybody against that?
I don't know if there's any other cheaper ideas to slow traffic down that direction too. It's the transition from doing the turn to going south, I guess, on F Highway. It seems wide open, but it's 25.
Well, it
35.
transitions, but if we made it a school zone, it'd make it even slower. Because if it's 45, they're not given a ticket until they're 10, 13 over, right, chief? I mean, realistically, we're not popping them for 46. And 50 seems really, really fast for in the residential area, but I mean, that's only 5 over at that intersection. So if we slow it down with it being school crossing, I think it'll stop some of the complaints.
Is there any issue with line of sight? That's a straight road and it's coming off that hill as far as the exact placement of it.
That's why we'd raise it and engineer it.
Okay.
I know the school's
Just throw a
working
bump
on-
out in there.
A what? Actually, not a bump out, we could do a dip, but just take out your whole suspension system. Engineered dip. We got some of those by Chevaliers. Speaking of that, there's some really good engineered dips by Chevalier's house right now that I hit. One on either side. Is that on purpose? Going in or out of this street. It's a good dip, Chuck. You should go check it out. Both sides. Anyway. It's a score of 5, I think. I mean, it's like this far down from the curb.
Oh, my goodness.
What's the name of the street? Yeah. It's settled pretty well.
On one side, it's like more pronounced.
If you're heading east on, what's the name of the street? Yeah, if you're heading east on 181st, it's a good dip. I tried to get air, but when you come around the curve in front of his house and head east, yeah, it's a good drop. Oh, is that what it is? Collapsed.
Collapsed. I think it's a sinkhole.
Sinkhole. Fill it up with trash. That's what I heard they did back in the day. I was at the state park. Got to read all about sinkholes this last weekend. All right.
In terms of looking at moving that project, if the estimate's somewhere around $70,000, we could look at getting that integrated into the fund. The only concern I have is as we work closer to 2024, we're going to really use fund balance. And if we go back, 2024 is the year where we do the commercial street sidewalks. So we use a lot of fund balance to do the project. But, you know, if things look good financially at that point, we can do it, then.
Yeah.
Well, I'll get this updated here, this forecast. We can talk about getting it in there. If that's what,
I think we should discuss with the school district on funding part of it. I've already talked to some of their folks on it, and they're putting a bond out, supposedly putting a bond out to put in more sidewalks on their campuses and stuff too. So it'd be a good time to try and work together on those projects again, like we did with Eagle. Moving on.
okay, capital improvement sales tax, the 5-year CIP. In this 5-year CIP, the first priority and obligation we have that we've used the sales tax for is to pay the annual debt service. We talked about that in the 9-month budget update. Next year, we'll have our construction cost for the final phase of streetscape at 800,000, and then that's supplemented by secured funding. Going forward in this fund, this really depends on whether these applications are accepted, and I think there's some feedback that's provided to us as we get rated on those applications. Depending on how those turn out, it'll allow us to fund some improvements such as the roundabouts in 25, 26, and then the sidewalks on Second Street. So we'll see how those turn out, and we can be flexible with this CIP and do different projects if those funds aren't received through the applications. In terms of the pending projects, at the top here is the downtown gateway sign on the pending list, the engineering construction for that sign. And then we have a number of roundabout projects that could also be eligible for MARC reimbursement funding. And then you'll also see the Pope Lane connection that connects that road from 172nd over to 169 is on the list. So I think it's really crucial if we're going to pay cash for these projects and get them funded through here that we have these grants. I don't think there's another way to do them without the grant funding, really. So.
One thing I would like for the board to consider, and we've not talked about it in a significant detail, but the top 2 projects there on that pending list, the downtown gateway sign design and the actual sign. I think it would be staff's recommendation that we could probably find better use of just shy of $300,000 of funding. We've had a lot of different discussions over time as to what that sign might be like. And then also what is the value of that sign. So I think that's something that we would like. We don't have to have answers on that now, but at least start thinking about if it makes sense to continue identifying those as funds, or that there could be better use of those funds.
I think with the grant we're getting for wayfinding development, I think this goes out the window. I mean, it was part of the original streetscape plan. Now we're getting actually engineered sign designs for the entire city for wayfinding. The one in North Kansas City, don't even notice it anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of archways that
Yeah.
are off to the distance. So
Yeah,
I
because
would
we'd have
be
to put
much
it
more
so far
big-
back because it's MoDOT right away all the way up to.
Right, there's the grandiose archway thing is it feels like something of the past, but I would really like to see really a brilliant design of wayfinding signs.
Well, and that's why that study will be helpful. And then if the board would concur with this, and we could take some direction this evening, maybe allocate a portion of that money there to be able to implement the wayfinding recommendations of
especially
that study.
the downtown, the entire downtown area, something that's, I guess, better or not better, but a little bit different than what the rest of the what would be universal wayfinding signs, the lake's this way, this park's this way. Downtown is this way, and it's a little more grandiose. That gets rid of the need to have an archway and things like that too. I remember original talks of LED signs and stuff like that. I don't think we'd get it.
See it from
passed,
the
but-
moon, like Napa.
I think the other thing also is the location of where that would be, and
Up in
any
space.
MoDOT authorizations on that too. It would be difficult to get because of coming in off of 169. So
Yeah, I think that, getting stuff out even as far as 435, 169 intersection now that we got more traffic coming this way. there's a few minor, there's plenty of space on those signs out there too.
I'd
way
love
out
to
there.
be able to afford to be able to do that for my restaurant.
Yeah, but if we
Just
do
the
a
highway
main,
signs.
if we do a Smithville Main Street one, like if you go 36, you see Chillicothe Main Street, Brookfield Main Street, Marceline Main Street on those signs. So if we look at doing something like that.
Right, it's easier to give people directions
Yep.
too. Whenever you're saying we're on Main Street and they think 169 is Main Street. Oh, it's not Main Street. Main Street is Main Street.
We have two main streets. Is that awesome?
Well,
Regular Main and
luckily,
North
that
Main.
doesn't come
North
into
Main,
play
right.
as much as just trying to get people to make that turn into our actual Main Street. McDonald's doesn't equal Main Street.
Arches. Disney's Main Street. Got the arcs, the arch.
Anything else on that fund? Move on.
Yes, sir.
See in that list, is it in any particular order?
No, I put a comment in there in terms of if something's a priority. It's simply a list at this point, and
Well, if we
A
get
lot
those
of
Mark
those-
grants, it's in
yeah,
order. That's because, yeah, those are the years we put in for the grants unless we ask Mark to flip something around, but we're getting ready to go through our funding at Mark and it'll be, if those get awarded, they stay on the list. If not, then they can move around.
yeah, I'm kind of looking at these back 3 years of the CIP, depending on if we get, we could do different projects in those last 3 years. If those aren't awarded grants, that fund probably cannot pay for that because there's 900,000 in grant money that wouldn't exist. And so
Yeah, and some of that,
that's
like,
a year and a half of sales tax.
in like Second Creek, part of that might get done as they develop along there. If those pieces of property sell and get subdivisions, there might be pieces of it, but we still have to go in and fill in the gaps. That's a wavy
there's-
line.
There's the cash flow in the fund. So as we do commercial or Bridge Street next year, streetscape, that's our lowest point of sales tax that we're projecting in the 5 years. Expecting to run the fund down about $110,000. So
Chuck, can we make sure when we do streetscape, we get rid of the 169 spur signs and telephone poles holding them up? It's not a highway anymore. And fix the grate. Fix the grate, please. Oh my, yeah, takes off the front corner of your car. All right,
all right.
we can skip Matt. He's not here to represent it, so. Chuck just gets the money. Oh, we watched the stormwater part.
We can't cut out parks.
Yeah,
Just
I
make
know.
stormwater.
How pretty that park is.
Our 5-year CIP for the park and stormwater sales tax. Really to talk about next year, we have, so you've seen throughout the CIP, a lot of work's going to be done on Quincy Boulevard or proposing to do a lot of work on Quincy. Part of that includes street, curb, stormwater construction, and we'd fund that out of this fund next year. We've 150,000 for Emerald Ridge Neighborhood Park. And then I think we're still awaiting some information on the Diamond Crest multi-use trail grant. If we receive that grant, we would look at a net cost of 100,000. We're expecting that project to be about 281, and we applied to receive 181 back to us. So receiving that would allow us to do that project. One new project that we put in, I talked to Matt about this, the citywide park signage. That would be setting up some consistent signs, some recommendations from the Parks and Rec Committee, some boulders that would be consistent across the city and would easily mark where a park is. And I think it would kind of look in line similar to the boulder out at Courtyard Park. So be a
Yep.
good consistent theme across the city. So that is added for next year in the fund.
Awesome.
Then looking at the rest of the CIP, we have allocation for stormwater program and work at Smith's Fork, the sport courts, the skate park, the basketball. And then as we look towards the end of the CIP, we start to get going on one of the first major projects as identified in the Parks and Rec Master Plan, the Smith's Fork destination work. should have realigned these slides a little bit. We have a lot of pending projects. It includes projects from the CIP or from the Parks and Rec Master Plan. I wanted to really show you this slide. We have a goal of trying to save up about $2 million by 2027, so we can do that work out at Smiths Fork, the destination project. And it came out of that Parks and Rec Master Plan. And we're on track to do that in the next 5 years with this cash flow. So as time goes on in these next 4 to 5 years, our goal is to continue to build that cash. And so at the end of the year, we're projecting to already have about 700,000 in the fund. And then ongoing, we're going to build 300,000 to 400,000 annually, so that we'll have enough money to pay cash for the project. At least that's the strategy. Any questions on that sales tax? Okay, I have a couple more funds to cover and that's going to be it, so. All right.
Fun funds.
Talk about the vehicle funds. We have really good, efficient, functional vehicles that we're leasing through Enterprise. Pictured there's one of the streets trucks with a salt spreader. In terms of the vehicle fund, as of last month, we're leasing 22 vehicles with Enterprise. I think our goal is to be around 30 vehicles and get our fleet turned over. And we have some specialty vehicles that we won't go with Enterprise through, that we'll continue to find other ways to purchase. But and as of that last month, we've sold the 14 vehicles. We have about 4 vehicles that I said that we're waiting on payment for, and another 2 in addition that we've already flipped. So we have a lot of money that's going to be coming in. And the last bullet point, we have on order 4 police interceptors. We've transferred that money into the fund. And we would also look to do an additional 4 police interceptors with Enterprise following that.
And I might point out also, as we sell those vehicles, we are getting a lot more on resale than what we had anticipated. We actually had one vehicle that we made money on. We made about
Yeah.
$12,000.
Yeah, so it was
One vehicle.
It was a 2021 Ford F-250. I can't remember which department, maybe in Public Works. But the difference between what the vehicle was purchased at on the contract or the government pricing and what it sold for, the equity difference was over $20,000. So that's going to come back to the city as revenue, and it's going to bolster that fund.
So that's one thing. There might be, based on Enterprise's calculations, there are some vehicles we're turning over pretty frequently, and not to pick on anyone or point anyone out, but the chief has had like 12 cars in the last week. That vehicle turns over a lot, but we are able to, we're rolling that over and it's becoming.
He doesn't
cash
get it long
for us.
enough to wax it.
Exactly.
2 oil changes, that's it.
In building this 5-year chart that you see, we work with Enterprise to get an idea of what the lease cost would be for our vehicles and what the projected gains would be when they go to sell them on our behalf. And we put those numbers into Excel. And so we're expecting to carry around 240, 230,000 in fund balance with a little bit of a bump at the end. And as we go, like I said, as we finish up this year, really want to see where we are and how well some of these vehicles that we're turning into Enterprise are selling, because they have some estimates, and then what's really coming back, there could be some variance between that, and it could bolster these numbers higher than what they are. These are a little bit conservative. So they did work incentives into the pricing though, into the projections, and so that's really important because we do get incentives on the vehicles since they're at that lower government rate. So
How is the vehicle wait time from ordered? Is it getting better?
I think it depends on what type of vehicle. If you ask the chief, I mean, like the police interceptors, we ask them for updates pretty frequently. And so those have been tough to get.
And we ordered those. You all provided authorization for us to
Yeah.
order those before we had them in the budget last year. So we're approaching a year that those have been on order. So that's been
There's been
frustrating.
significant wait time, and it's been a bit frustrating. The microchip issue was a problem because they would just sit at the dealer, not at the dealership. They'd sit at the
Factory.
manufacturing plant waiting for the chips so then they could go. But This past 2 months, I think we've received 6 or 8 new vehicles. There's been a big bulk of the fleet's been turned over in the last couple of months. But yeah, the wait time it's been lengthy. So. Okay, we'll talk about one more pass-through fund, which is our sanitation fund and the city's contract with GFL.
Glad they painted them Smithville green.
There you go.
The
There
blue
you-
trucks were not good.
On the sanitation fund, give you a little summary of our activity as of last month. We contract with GFL to service about 3,300 regular trash accounts. And we have about 400 senior rate accounts. So if you recall, last year in the budget, we approved the senior discount of 15%. And it's been very popular. We have over 400 of those accounts, which are active as of last month. So as a reminder, we're proposing to do a 5% increase in the trash charge per the contract with GFL. And then we would see that on the regular and the senior charge. On the cash flow, we really just try to maintain, there's no particular amount that we're trying to achieve, but just trying to maintain enough balance so that we can make a payment, make an additional payment if we needed for some reason. Just trying to keep enough in the fund so that we can have also some movement with the rates. And if we needed to make some rate adjustments, for whatever reason. Right, we'll wrap up tonight's budget presentation with some summaries of the budget that kind of put it all together in a 30,000 foot view. So the CIP, looking at all the funds on the left across 5 years, it is a $39.9 million CIP. I think the screen's blocking it. I think that's the number. And actually next year's our biggest year in terms of projects at 10.7 million. So next year is going to be ultra busy. And then the proposed 2023 all fund summary, we have 18 budgeted funds, which are shown on the left. For proposed revenues, it's a total of 20.1 million, and in expenses, it's 23.8. So we would use overall on the 18 funds, we would use cash balance, use fund balance from an overall perspective across the city. Some of the biggest fund balance usage would come in the general fund, and then in the utilities fund, as we saw doing all those projects, we'll use cash in that fund. Any questions before we wrap up with our process schedule? We have tonight's discussion. We have September 6th to discuss if the board wishes to have another discussion on the budget. If you have further comments or input or things you think that we need to discuss. And then after that, we'll have our first and second reading in October.
So if nothing's there to discuss on the 6th, you can have the first reading ready for the end of September.
I think we probably stay on the schedule for October.
Come
Part of that also
Man, you don't
allows
want to
us,
get ahead of schedule?
one of the things
Need
that
all that
allows
time.
us to do is because we don't encumber funds, if
Yeah.
we're seeing that we're not finishing projects or like that, lets us get a little bit closer to the end of the year so we can budget those expenditures for next year and have that expenditure authority. So that is if you all want to hear what you all have in response to the budget, if there are any changes, and if we need to have a meeting on the 6th, or if we can start moving forward. I will note if the board concurs with the plan as outlined, staff is planning to meet as early as next week to start looking at putting a timeline together on, okay, these are the projects that we're looking at. The board will approve, will become effective November 1. So we will put together our bidding schedule and timelines to get those projects rolling as soon after November 1 as possible.
I was worried I'm gonna come back from Disney and not want to vote on a budget. John, how'd you feel after getting back? 10 days at Disney, I might come back and I want to approve a budget. All right. Anything else?
Yeah, I just have one question. I know that when we, during the retreat, we talked about with like animal control, kind of combining a couple of part-time positions and then kind of partitioning out a new one. I don't see that in any of this stuff. So where are we at on that?
We have incorporated into the planning calendar to have discussion with the board in September. And that'd be another reason for looking, if there's any changes to the budget, we could incorporate that in there. Alderman Kabilski is working with the Friends of Megan's Paws and Claws, and we are looking at some alternatives of how we might be able to provide some services. And so we hope to be able to have a meeting in time. We may not be able, we're gonna have to talk about time frame on that. We've had some things change in that timeline just in the last couple of days. But we want to bring those discussions back to the board. And that would be a September, early October timeframe of getting some feedback on that. And then we would incorporate anything into the budget.
Yeah, and I think Chief and the department, they've provided us some really good data. And we've also had some discussions with the friends that there's a lot that happens in the county that we really won't. Change in staffing won't change that. So they're working with Clay County Sheriffs now and Platte County and those commissioners. So there's probably some other routes to go. Anything else?
And this includes the utility rate increase study, correct?
Yes, it does.
And also the other increases that we talked about the budget as far
Schedule
as
fees,
parts and
that's-
rec, et cetera, schedule fees.
And that's why we do those when we do, so that then, once we've got your feedback on that, we incorporate those into the budget development. And sorry, we didn't highlight those a little bit more in there. Then we would have slides.
Should go for an even 100 next time. It's the biggest, you got time, man. No, motion to adjourn. Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
All right.
Aye.
15 minutes.
Thank you all.